It started with the sound of metal clinking against metal, faint but deliberate, echoing across the still morning air. From her kitchen window, the narrator could see the narrow alley behind the townhouse row, where her assigned parking spot sat neatly between two others. Her Jeep, dusty from the weekend's off-road trip, was right where she had left it the night before, secured by the thick, heavy-duty chain and lock she always used. That lock wasn't cheap. She had bought it after hearing rumors about the HOA towing vehicles they didn't like. The neighborhood was pristine, almost unnaturally so. Lawns trimmed within an inch of their lives, mailboxes painted the exact shade of beige mandated by the HOA guidelines, and even trash cans hidden from view except during the narrow pickup window. It was the kind of place where smiling neighbors waved at each other but silently measured the height of each other's hedges. The HOA president, who everyone quietly referred to as Karen, though that wasn't her real name, ran the place, like a miniature dictatorship. She didn't just enforce the rules, she interpreted them, often in ways that benefited herself. If she decided a car looked abandoned, she'd have it towed. If a decoration looked too loud, she'd fine the homeowner. The Jeep had been a quiet point of tension for weeks now. Karen had sent 2 notices claiming it was unsightly and in violation of community aesthetic. The narrator had brushed them off. After all, the Jeep was registered, operable, and parked in her own assigned spot. But Karen didn't let things go. She collected grudges like some people collected porcelain figurines. That morning, as the narrator stepped outside to head to work, she froze. The chain that had been looped tightly through the Jeep's wheel and anchored to the post was gone. Not broken. Gone. In its place lay a small, jagged piece of metal, the shorn remains of the lock's shackle. Her stomach sank. The Jeep itself was still there. But something felt off. A smear of fresh boot prints dotted the concrete, leading from the Jeep toward the side gate that only HOA board members had the key for. The gate hung slightly ajar, swinging lazily in the morning breeze. It didn't make sense. Why cut the lock if you weren't going to take the vehicle? Unless, the thought lodged in her mind, cold and sour. This wasn't random vandalism. This was someone sending a message. A glance at her mailbox confirmed it. Sitting right on top of the stack of flyers and junk mail was an official HOA envelope, the kind printed with urgent notice in bold red letters. Inside was a single page, written in clipped, almost smug language, informing her that the Jeep had been flagged for removal due to failure to comply with community standards, and that further action would be taken without notice. Her pulse quickened. The letter wasn't dated. It wasn't even signed. And the worst part? She had the creeping, undeniable feeling that further action had already been set in motion. She locked her front door, but the unease lingered. Somewhere, someone was waiting for her next move, and she had no idea that this small act of petty HOA overreach was about to spiral into a storm she could never have predicted. The next morning brought a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The Jeep was gone. There had been no tow truck noise, no warning, no paperwork left behind, just an empty space and faint tire tracks leading out of the alley. The chain was still missing, the gate still unlocked. The narrator's first call was to the HOA office. Predictably, no one picked up. The second call was to the local towing company the HOA usually used, but they claimed they hadn't moved the vehicle. That left 2 possibilities. Someone had stolen it, or someone within the HOA had taken matters into their own hands. A sick suspicion settled in. This was Karen's doing. She had been angling for this for weeks, and now she had the perfect excuse. The narrator marched down to the HOA meeting that evening, the kind of gathering where folding chairs squeaked on the community center floor, and neighbors whispered like they were at a middle school cafeteria. Karen sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, smile thin and polished, like she was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. The moment the narrator's question left her lips, "Where is my Jeep?" The room went silent. Karen's answer was vague, evasive, and wrapped in just enough pseudo-legal jargon to avoid direct accusation. She claimed the vehicle had been relocated for non-compliance, but refused to disclose where it had been taken. Every person in that room could see what was happening. Karen was asserting control, making an example. The narrator could file a complaint, but those took weeks, sometimes months, and in the meantime, the Jeep could be impounded, sold, or even scrapped. The rest of the meeting passed in a haze of simmering anger. Every time the narrator's gaze met Karen's, there was a flicker of smug satisfaction in the woman's eyes. She had won, for now. But Karen had underestimated something. The Jeep wasn't just another car. It was a link to something bigger, something the narrator couldn't exactly explain to anyone in that room without raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead of heading home that night, the narrator drove to a small storage facility on the edge of town. Inside was a locked trunk, heavy and cold to the touch, containing a set of documents, an old duffel bag, and a burner phone that hadn't been used in months. The phone lit up instantly when powered on. 4 missed calls, all from the same number. It was an unlisted line, one she only ever heard from when something was about to go very, very wrong. The message waiting in the voicemail inbox was short. The voice on the other end didn't sound angry. It sounded urgent. They knew about the Jeep and they were coming. It was still dark when the pounding started. Not the polite, hesitant knock of a neighbor, but the heavy, rhythmic thud of someone who didn't plan on being ignored. The narrator opened the door to find 3 men in plain clothes standing on the porch. They weren't wearing badges on their belts, but their eyes, their posture. Every bit of them radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from years in law enforcement. One of them held up a photograph. It was the Jeep. Before the narrator could speak, they stepped inside, moving, with the efficient precision of people who had done this before. They weren't here to accuse. They were here to confirm. And when they asked where the Jeep was, the narrator's answer was simple. The HOA took it. The room seemed to tighten. The lead agent's jaw clenched. He explained in careful, clipped sentences that the Jeep wasn't just a personal vehicle. It was an undercover asset belonging to a multi-agency police task force. Hidden compartments inside held specialized surveillance equipment, all of it sensitive, all of it classified. And now it was in the hands of an overzealous HOA president. The timeline sharpened into something dangerous. If Karen or anyone else tampered with the vehicle, not only could the equipment be damaged, but an entire operation could be compromised. Names, locations, ongoing investigations, all at risk because someone thought the Jeep didn't fit the community aesthetic. The agents moved quickly. Within an hour, unmarked SUVs were circling the HOA complex. Neighbors peeked through, blinds, whispering theories. Some thought it was a raid for drugs. Others assumed it was an immigration sweep. Only the narrator knew the truth, and even then, not the full scope. When they finally found the Jeep, it was parked behind Karen's house, shielded from street view by her tall privacy fence. The lock had been cut again, this time on the Jeep's own rear compartment. A small box sat open on the ground, its contents partially exposed, wires, cameras, encrypted drives. Karen stood in her driveway, arms folded, insisting she had every right to inspect a vehicle that violated community rules. She had no idea that every word she spoke was being recorded, that every movement she made was being watched by people far beyond the HOA's jurisdiction. The agents didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Within minutes, Karen was being escorted away, not arrested, not yet, but firmly removed from the scene as federal custody protocols were initiated. The Jeep was driven off, swallowed by the early morning fog, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and the stunned silence of a neighborhood that had just watched their HOA president get dismantled without a single raised voice. The narrator knew there would be fallout. Karen was the type to fight until the bitter end. But this time, she wasn't up against a stubborn homeowner. She was up against a task force, and in that fight, her HOA bylaws meant absolutely nothing.